help in keeping those bridges open. So thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer questions or make comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Vogel. That is very thought-provoking and very, very insightful. We do have a lot of questions coming in right now, but before I just read those questions, I just wanted to say I remembered one sentence from your latest book, that when you actually described the relationship between China and Japan, you said the economics is hot, but the politics is cold. So you hope that at least the politics could be warm. I think that's a wishful thinking for not only Japan and China, but also, US and China as well. Let's hope at least both the economics and politics could at least be lukewarm, if not hot.
Thank you. I agree completely.
Yeah. All right. So we do have a lot of questions. I apologize first. We may not be able to get to every one of the questions, but hopefully we can hit, certain types of questions. I've actually bucketed those questions into three broad categories. The first category is actually the bilateral relationship between US and China, which I think you've talked quite a lot about. But what do you think is the root cause of the escalation of the US-China tension right now? And what do you think is going to be the ultimate solution for a major Sino-US conflicts?
I think they have gotten a lot worse during the Trump era because of bad management on our side. And I think from the great confidence that some of the Chinese have. Some of my American diplomat friends tell me when they meet some Chinese diplomats, the word they use is arrogant. You could use a nicer word and say they're proud and confident and patriotic. But to some American diplomats, it feels like they're being talked down to now by some Chinese diplomats who feel they're more confident. So I think it's Chinese success and some of the other factors I mentioned are part of the background. But I think the immediate cause has to do with the Trump administration and the lack of professionalism. He hasn't relied on diplomats. He's relied more on our military than on our diplomats for our international policies. Therefore, the usual exchanges of dealing with issues, the day-to-day handling of problems has not gone well. And that the United States has withdrawn from international organizations. It's not only China, but I think the relations with Canada and European countries are all not as good as they were. So I think a lot of the reasons why in the last 3 years it's initiated by America, but I think also Chinese there are some confident Chinese. And I think that the tightness of China the last, say, 8 or 10 years, since about 2012, the tightness of the policy, the secrecy, of course, Xinjiang and Hong Kong have made things worse. And I think a lot of Americans have felt that the Chinese government does not respect human rights. And I think the news about the Uyghur in Xinjiang as well as Tibet, and then Hong Kong, the demonstrators, I think the feeling in the United States is that has been handled very badly. And that's not the kind of country that we want to be friendly with. So I think those are the things that have made it get so much worse the last 3 years.
Great. The second question is, it's amazing fact that you have witnessed a major course of rise in China. Speaking of keeping the bridge open, what would be your top 3 advice to the future presidents of America about China?
First of all, we need high-level dialogues at a frank level. And we need to use diplomats. So I think right now we already have pretty good understanding between military people on the two sides to prevent accidents. I think that's very, very crucial and very urgent. But my understanding is there have been talks in a place like the South China Sea on how to avoid accidents that might lead to something worse. So I think dialogue is very important. Second is, I think we need to work together on economic cooperation. I think there's some areas that are going to be hard to avoid decoupling. I think in national security, and I think in the United States, there's great worry that Chinese, by tapping in to secrets, will make our military and much more vulnerable, and that they're very worried that China, with advanced technology, companies like Huawei that could tap into our technology would lead to a collection of secrets. And then, of course, the Chinese are worried about the United States doing the same way. So I think we need some understandanding on those issues. But in other areas, I think we should not have decoupling. And I think that companies, we're inexperienced. It's a whole new era. How as a country do we find ways of protecting our secrets? Take our universities, for example. Now we've had some visits to Harvard by people in the security field who worry that some Chinese scientists are stealing secrets. Now, if some of those are military secrets, of course, any nation in China, the United States, any nation would want to defend against those secrets. But how do you go about it that protects the freedom of the 99% where that's not a problem? Mm-hmm. And I think we're not experienced in that. So I think that's another area, is how to manage those areas of economic competition and to come back to have a lot more decoupling. And thirdly, I think we do need to have more intellectual exchange. I think we need to open ways. And here, I think China has a job to do, is maybe even more than we do, because they've made it so difficult for people to feel free to speak out openly. And they've made it so difficult for foreigners now to go to China and express their opinions freely without getting their Chinese friends in public in trouble. So I think those are you asked for three, those would be my top three.
Great, that's awesome. And I know you talked a little bit about, you think it's much likely that we will have a Biden win, and it seems that a lot of the audience are very curious whether you think the policy will be different, especially, Chinese policy towards China would be different under a Biden administration, or do you think it's going to be more or less the same?
Well, for one thing, I think it will be much more predictable. And I think they would want to have, now we have no real high-level talks between officials. And before Trump, of course, under Obama, we had frank talks between very high-level leaders. Mm-hmm. So I think there would be a resumption. Of course, Biden cannot say that now because the mood against China is very negative. Mm-hmm. And he cannot say that he wants to have a lot more talks. Mm-hmm. But my suspicion is that knowing the kind of person he is, and since he did know Xi Jinping when they were both the number two in their countries, they had some contact. So I think there's a basis of contact. And I think there will be some more frank and competitors can talk as competitors, but that doesn't have to be enemies. It can be competitors, it can be suspicion, but it can be, under some kind of control. So I think that will happen. I think also that Biden, of course, will want to resume American participation in international organizations like WTO, WHO, and the Paris climate talks, certainly the Paris climate talks. And I think on all those, China is ready to take part. So I think we could start in those areas which are not close to political, but where it's so obviously in the interest of both countries to work together. We have now at Harvard, as you may know, a group of people who are working with Beijing on climate issues. Mm-hmm. And they're doing joint research, and they've had a lot of exchange. And that can be lifted up government levels. It's not happening at government levels, but I think there's already a good basis for that. So I think a second thing that would happen would be in those areas that are not close to military and so forth, that we will have a greater degree of cooperation. And I think that, as you know, there are many Chinese who have studied in the United States, who've gone back in various high positions. I think it would be ready to take part in those. And I think even on coronavirus, we have a chance that there's some people in China and the United States are already working together. One of my friends at Harvard School of Public Health, Bill Xiao, who just retired from the School of Public Health a couple of years ago, and his successor, Wen Yip, they have done a lot of work with Chinese counterparts, and I think they are already still in contact. And I think that can be maybe bounced up to a little higher level. I think there would be some increase in that. I think on science, there'll be some areas we can cooperate. I think to get together on military issues, I think that the best we can hope in the early stages of a year or two is to avoid accidents and to avoid misunderstandings. I think right now I would say the Taiwan thing is a bit dangerous because there's some people in Congress who don't realize how sensitive Beijing is to the Taiwan issue. And that if they try to move toward making Taiwan an independent country, how risky that is. I think that there's a good chance that those people could quiet down. We would still support Taiwan and be friendly, but I think there's a difference between being friendly to Taiwan and giving it encouragement to go independent. And I would hope that the Biden administration would make that difference. So I don't have any secrets on that. Biden hasn't asked me. I have met some of the people who are working on the Biden campaign, but I don't have any secrets. But knowing from the thinking of friends I knew in Washington and friends I still know, that's my best guess.
Great. You actually already talked about my next question a little bit, because a lot of our audience are very curious about if you have to assign a probability of a military confrontation between US and China, whether it's in the South Sea or in Taiwan, as you mentioned, how likely do you think we will have something very serious here?
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents, and you may have different opinions. I think the Chinese are very cautious. Mm-hmm. And they realize that the American military is very strong. And I think the Americans are now going to, we're still going to have so-called freedom of navigation, means sending a lot of planes and ships into the South China Seas. I think the Chinese are going to be very cautious in starting anything. I don't think the United States wants to start anything. I think China getting stronger, I would worry more about 10 years from now than I would worry about now. That's my evaluation, because I think that as long as the Chinese feel that the American military is so strong, it's true that if there were to be some kind of quick battle in the South China Sea or in the East China Seas because China is located so close, it can get so many resources that America are too far away. So the immediate first few hours, I think the United States would have trouble. But the United States has such overwhelming force that I think the Chinese would be real cautious. So I think that in the next few years, if I had to say probability, I would say it's very low. But it's enough to worry about, and it's enough for high-level officials to talk about, to say how we would avoid it. And I think there have been already some talks. I think that there has to, if I had a best case scenario, it would be the Chinese and the Americans talk about the South China Sea, and that we realize that this is neighborhood of China, and that we don't need to have military tensions there, that they can be open for the world, and that over the next few years, it is close to China. China has more interest in that area, that we can avoid any kind of conflict.
Great. We've talked so much about US and China. It's probably time for me to move on to our second broad category, which is regarding China's domestic issues like Hong Kong and Xinjiang. So Professor Vogel, you have been in Hong Kong multiple times. You've also visited Hong Kong last year during the demonstration period. What is your view of demonstration in Hong Kong in the latest political development in Hong Kong? And what type of role do you think Hong Kong plays in this US and China escalated conflicts?
I think Hong Kong I think that China has not managed Hong Kong well. As you know, my background was sociology. And I think about the people in Hong Kong. The way I see Hong Kong society is there are a lot of bright mainland students who wanted to come to Hong Kong the last few years. And perhaps you were one of those who went to Hong Kong University. If you consider out of 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, an awful lot of smart people who thought Hong Kong was a good place to go. Mm-hmm. And so if you take a population of 7 million and you say how many brilliant people there are quite a few brilliant people, but you say out of the 1.4 billion, and a lot of those go to Hong Kong, then I think a lot of the local people feel that the best positions at Gangda and at Zhongwen Daxue, a lot of the best positions have gone to those in the mainland. So I think there is, and then if I were a company in Hong Kong, and I wanted to do business, of course, with mainland where the main business places are, I would want somebody who can deal with the mainland. So somebody who spoke Mandarin naturally instead of after learning Cantonese, learning Mandarin, and who grew up in the mainland, would be somebody I would probably hire before a lot of the bright young local people. So I think a lot of the bright young local people, although it's taken on a political covering, I think underneath there are the social things. Then there's another thing, I think within Hong Kong, a lot of the people who 30 years ago were manufacturers, of course, have moved manufacturing to mainland, and they make their money through renting. So they charge huge rents. It's a very stable source of income. Because so many people who come to Hong Kong, they charge very high rents. So if you're a local person and you have trouble getting into, you're a bright young person, 20 years old, you're fairly bright, you get past college, and you're looking for a good job, you want to get married, and the rents are so high you can't afford a decent place, you can't get a good job. And then besides that, your freedoms aren't going to be as great as they used to be. There's a lot of reason for dissatisfaction. So what I think the leader, so I think in other words, a lot of the rich people in Hong Kong who are making money and have worked with Beijing very closely are have not been at the forefront in solving the social and economic problems of Hong Kong, and have not given enough support to the students and have not found a way to express their opinion. I think some of the people who were protesting were not handling the situation very well either. But I think that the politics was not well done before. I think that if mainland China leaders and the leaders of Hong Kong had worked together to find ways of not allowing rents to go so high, building out a lot more housing more quickly and making lower price, finding more employment opportunities, and had given some voice to the local people, it wouldn't have gotten so bad. I'm afraid we're in for a very tense period in Hong Kong. I think that by mainland sending in people who can keep peace, that's going to arouse the reaction of people all over the world. And it's possible they can keep down the demonstrations, but I think the tensions are going to remain very high. And I hope there would be some wise people in the mainland who can find better ways to handle those social problems in Hong Kong and can find ways to get a lot more housing quickly at low price, can find new economic opportunities for local people. But I think there are those underlying problems. So that's my quick view of Hong Kong.
Great. You mentioned about how China handled Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, and some of the concerns on human rights violation. One of the audience says, curious to hear your thought on this. Would you classify China as repressive regime as the mainstream does? Why or why not? By what standard?
I think that they have been repressive of the Xinjiang, from what I know. I'm not a specialist. I do have some American friends, scholars, who've been studying in Xinjiang and are not allowed to go there anymore, not allowed to have any contact with Uyghurs. I visited there 10 years or so ago. And, I didn't realize at that time, just seeing people in the streets, how tense relations were between the Uyghurs. I think they're more enlightened policies. They could have given more leeway to the Uyghurs than the crackdown. If I were in Beijing now and had a high leader, I would be worried, that in such a huge country, how do you keep order? And I can understand why high-level communist officials looking at what happened in the Soviet Union and looking what happened in Eastern Europe feel that the only way to do is to have tight control. I wish that there were people now who would be like Hu Yaobang. I think of as a kind of person who would have tried to find a way of granting more freedom and more opportunity, and somehow keeping peace, even while allowing more, and making those minority groups feel more comfortable. The United States did not do a good job of handling our American Indians, and we did a lot of bad things in handling blacks in the past. I think as a whole, in the last few decades, we've been trying to improve the relations with the blacks, but you see how hard that is. I think in China, there would be ways of giving more opportunities to the Tibetans and to the Uyghur that perhaps could have led to a different result where the leaders didn't feel they had to crack down so hard. I think that those are the views, I would say, not just to me personally, but I would say of a liberal American looking at those situations. On the other hand, as a China specialist who's seen the difficulty of uniting China since the 19th century, I can understand why some leaders who feel that the only way to keep order is to crack down. It's too bad, and I think it's not going to win China friends throughout the world to do it that way. But I think that's the way it is.
Thank you so much, Professor Vogel. I think it's time for our third broad category, which is the trilateral relationship of US, China, and Japan. If the US continues to treat China as a rival in East Asia, what role do you think Japan is likely to play in the new dynamic? Will Japan align more closely with the US to contain China, or maneuver to allow itself to have more flexibility for ease the relationship with China, or any kind of other approach, do you think?
Japanese are much more polite to Chinese than Americans are. And so when Trump yells at China, the Japanese leaders are much more cautious, and they know what horrible things they've done in World War II, and I think there is some sense of guilt because of that. But I think also they know what happened after 1992 when China had the Aigochuyi Yundong. And during that time, there were a lot of movies about World War II. And there were a lot of movies about horrible Japanese. And I would go to Beijing at that time and turn on the TV. And it was not difficult to find a World War II movie where the Japanese were behaving pretty bad. So during that period, the Japanese watched those movies, and they watched the Chinese ships near the Diaoyudiao, Senkaku, attacking. So they don't feel very comfortable. So I think, and the Japanese know they can't keep up with China in military expenses. So I think at a military level, the Japanese are going to want to work with the United States and to be able to rely on it. At the same time, I think they are readier to work with China and have a deeper basis for having friendly relations with China than does the United States. There are a lot of Japanese who learn Chinese. The Japanese trading companies, it's a very interesting institution. They have like 10 offices, or 8 or 10 offices in different parts of China. And the people who are there intend to stay. And they often not only know Mandarin, but the local dialect and have good relations with local people. So when a Japanese company goes in to those areas, you can work with one of those trading companies. So that gives them a good base for continuing to find economic opportunities. And I think also the Japanese companies are less likely to give away high technology secrets. If I were an American manager in China and I were judged on how much profit I made next quarter, I might be willing to give away a few technology secrets if I got market share. And I think American companies have been readier to do that than Japanese. So I think Japanese have often kept their technology. They're in there for a long term. They're not as concerned with short-term profits. So I think all those reasons give them a better basis. In addition now, because they're physically close and transport is so good, a Japanese businessman from Tokyo or Osaka, if it weren't for the coronavirus, could fly to Beijing or Shanghai in the morning, have lunch, do business, come back in the evening, all in one day. And I think that has made for much easier communication between Japanese. I think there are also a few cultural things that make it closer, even though they were enemies, and the Chinese during the period of anti-Japanese war movies, there were plenty of anger at Japan that was expressed on the streets and trashing of Japanese tours in China. I think that a lot of Chinese tourists, when they go to Japan and they see the signs in Chinese characters, and maybe a little different characters, but there's a certain familiarity in Buddhism. So I think that there are cultural ties, so that when Chinese tourists the last few years have been going to Japan, I think in 2018 there was something like 8 million Chinese tourists. And when they go there, they say, hey, the Japanese are very polite. They're not like those soldiers we saw in those movies. They're very polite. The place is orderly. It's clean. They've already reached a comfortable way of life. This isn't such a bad place. So I think in terms of the image that a lot of people have of Japan, once they get rid of the World War II image, and look at Japan today, it doesn't seem so bad. And I think the Japanese have figured out a way to learn and live with the Chinese somewhat better than we Americans. I'm just talking kind of average. Of course, there are a lot of exceptions and all these rules, but I think what I'm describing, I think, is a different attitude.
Great. A very timely question, especially considering where we are right now in this COVID world, and with President Trump keep using China virus in public. Seems that the world is blaming China for hiding during the COVID outbreak in China, and seems that there's a lot of hate associated with the virus and how China handles the virus. What do you think should Chinese government do to improve the impression from the world, especially after this COVID thing?
I'm not a specialist on this topic, but I try to follow it. And from what I hear, from December of last year until January, the leaders in China did not do all they could, as quickly as they could, to notify World Health Organization and world others. There were some steps they took. And of course, China now is trying to give out publicity about how much they communicated. But as nearly as I can tell from the most objective accounts of foreigners who are familiar with the situation, there were cases in which China was not quick in passing on. I think in terms of individual groups of Chinese who helped out Americans get masks and get other kinds of equipment, I think that was extremely helpful. It hasn't got as much publicity as it should, but I think there are a lot of local areas who appreciate that individual Chinese groups have played a very constructive role in trying to get equipment to Americans. And what I would do at this point, I think to come on and complain about what was going on in December, January, and do it completely. I think sooner or later, the Western, or enough Westerners who have enough concrete data that to try to disguise all the things that happen. I think it's better to admit that some mistakes were made in China as well as in the United States, and to then develop credibility is, I think that would be more effective. And put another way, I think the Chinese propaganda department has found ways to tell stories and assume that becomes a dominant story within China. And that has succeeded pretty well in China. But I think that we Westerners are used to more open discussion. We aren't, if there's going to be evidence, we aren't going to, China can occasionally hide evidence about June 4th or what happened in the Cultural Revolution or in the Great Leap Forward. There are some people in propaganda department can hide evidence and be quiet about it, but that doesn't work on the outside. And I'm not sure it can work in the long run in China either, because now so many people are in touch with the outside that people going to China have to be careful because they have to protect themselves. But I think it's very hard to expect that propaganda department's effort to keep things quiet can convince people, and certainly when they go abroad, I think there are going to be foreigners who are going to find evidence that's very, cannot be denied, that's going to show that some of the things the propaganda department says is not true. So I think in the long run, it would be better if the propaganda department admitted things, because I think in the whole wide world, there's so many people trying to find out that I think it would be wiser in the long run. It would get more difficult in the short run, but I think as a long run strategy, it would be a better strategy.
Thank you so much, Professor Vogel. I know we're getting close to the clock, but I do see one more question, which I think is very, very interesting, and it probably will leave us with some food for thoughts. It says the relationship between East and West seems to be like Mac versus Windows. Now, given the contrast in the two mindsets, what would you say is the number one misunderstanding between East and West?
I don't think it's that simple. I mean, to me, there's so many different kinds of Chinese and so many different kinds of Americans that I don't think it can be put down into one thing. The thing I just mentioned, I think, is one thing that's a very wide difference, and that is the propaganda department tries to present one side of the story, and it's the correct story, and they don't allow people to question, and people are supposed to behave. That has brought some kind of order. And I think in the United States, until now, we've been able to bring the country together by having everybody express their opinions. I think the United States is now so much, I think the United States is maybe extreme, but I think many Western countries are similar in the sense that we want things to get out and open. Everybody says whatever they think and what they want, and they express their idea. I think the United States now, during the Trump era, we're so divided and we're so quarrelsome that we're going to have to find some better way to handle things. And I think that China, which also now keeps order by keeping down outside opinions and by clamping down on people, I think that's going to be in trouble in the long run, because when you're in contact with the world, I think your new opinions will come in, and that effort to keep things quiet, I don't see how it can last. So I suppose if I had to say one common difference, that's it, that China now tries to keep order by keeping things under control and not allowing a lot of wild differences. And we have allowed people to say and do what they want, but are also having trouble now trying to keep our country together. Well, all those are musings of an old guy who has seen a lot of things in the course of his history. And really wants, I have so many good Chinese friends, and I so much want our countries to get along better. And I think all of you can be helpful. You have a lot of friends, I'm sure, in China, relatives maybe, but friends, and a lot of friends in this country who are not Chinese. And I think all of us have a role in trying to make it work. So I very much appreciate the chance to appear before you, and I very much appreciate your chance to let an old man tell it like he sees it.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Vogel. I do wish we could have another hour to talk about this. I know there are so many questions we haven't addressed, and I also apologize. I know some of the attendees, you wanted to invite your friends to our seminar, but unfortunately, we just quickly reached our upper limits. We have 520 people coming today, which is a wonderful success. So do apology, and thank you so much for everyone who's attending tonight. And for those who do want to follow us, I just wanted to do a very quick plug. We are New England Chinese American Alliance. We are hosting a series of our what we call distinguished speaker series, like featuring Professor Vogel. And there will be a number of other seminars that we will be hosting in the future. So we really look forward to seeing all of you in our future events. With that note, I just wanted to conclude our event tonight by saying a big thank you to Professor Vogel. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks very much for our co-chairs, our board members who's helping to make this event happen today. And with that, good night to everyone. And for those who joined.
I want to say I thank you for the opportunity. I think your organization is doing a wonderful thing, and we wish you to succeed. It's good for you and it's good for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And good morning for anyone who joined from Asia. And good night, everyone here in the US. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be safe. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.